We are joined from Paris by Mr. Maher Nicolas Firzli, the World Bank former advisor and director of the Washington Forum. Mr. Firzli, welcome to In Focus. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has hosted European Union leaders in a historic summit, resulting in a broad agreement on trade, defence and border cooperation. To what extent does this deal mark a true reset in UK-EU relations, and what are the most significant breakthroughs?
Delighted to join you today. I think to a very limited extent. So today, when they met in London at Lancaster House, beautiful palazzo in the centre west of London, a very romantic place. But I think there was a lot of hype in the way Prime Minister Keir Starmer and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen hailed today's deal as a historic moment. Of course, it is not a historic moment, and for a very simple reason. A lot of the terms of today's so-called historic deals were already known. And why were they already known? And this is the theatrical part. And sadly, public opinion has a short attention span, so they forget. So Brexit vote happened precisely 9 years ago. So already it's abnormal that it took 9 years for the British government to negotiate its exit from the European Union. And who won by dragging things? Of course, the EU won. So at every step in the past 9 years, every time they were negotiating, the Brits had to back down, and the European Commission took away a little bit of sovereignty from Britain. And why did, in the past 9 years, Britain had like 4 or 5 prime ministers. So it is certainly not Keir Starmer's fault, because Keir Starmer is only responsible for the last nail in the coffin. But there were 4 prime ministers before him, most of them, all of them conservative. And so why did they botch the post-Brexit vote negotiations? For a very simple reason. Once again, people forget it. The Brexit vote happened in June 2016, and in March 2017, 8 months after the vote, the UK Prime Minister, back then I think it was Theresa May, made a huge mistake under pressure from her own MPs, under pressure from Conservative Party MPs. What the Brits did in 2017, they invoked, as lawyers say, they invoked Article 50 of the EU Constitution. And the moment the British Prime Minister pressed the Article 50 button, Britain was doomed. Everything which happened later, so everything which happened in the past 8 years, was the consequence of that fatal moment, because Article 50, not invoking Article 50, waiting and negotiating, would have given Britain the upper hand. Big strategic mistake from the Brits, and they're paying the consequence, because today, after 8 years of painfully slow negotiations, like I said, the deal is done, but it's not a wonderful, unique moment like Keir Starmer said. It is a mediocre deal for the Brits, and it's quite a good deal. It's a good deal. So for the EU, it's a good deal, and for Britain, it's a mediocre, verging on bad deal. But the reason, the elephant in the room, is there is war in Ukraine, and the Brits and the Europeans are feeling abandoned by President Trump. And I think that is what is bringing London and Brussels and Paris and Berlin together. They feel orphaned, or they feel that America in the past 3-4 months stabbed them in the back, quote unquote. That's their perception. I think it's wrong, but they are getting closer to each other, and they're saying, okay, in that very harsh, brutal world we live in today, we have to rebuild some sort of union. So to make a long story short, they are rebuilding the European Union with Britain in a way, but with an enfeebled Britain. So they have clipped England's or Britain's wings, sadly.
Yes. So if the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is the real driver or the reason behind the UK and the EU getting together, now the new defence pact allowing UK firms to join the 150 billion euro EU defence fund to rearm Europe. How does this reflect shifting the security priorities in Europe, and what role could Britain play in shaping Europe's military future?
Clearly, that was the only ace. So, the EU bureaucrats, France, Germany, they had all the cards. And the only card that poor Keir Starmer had, once again, it's not only Keir Starmer's fault, because the conservative prime ministers who preceded him had already cooked 80 or 85% of that negotiation with the EU. So what was left for poor Keir Starmer to negotiate wasn't much. But he made the most of it. He made the most of a bad situation. And so that was the ace in Britain's game. The two best military forces in Europe are by far the French and the British. And the size of the military budget and the size of the armed forces in Britain and France is bigger in absolute and relative terms than that of all the other EU member states, including Germany. So that gives an edge to Britain. And of course, what cynically, some people may say that what Keir Starmer did today, he sacrificed, for example, the UK fishing industry, which represents less than 1% of the GDP, in exchange for the hope of having a big slice of the EU defense cake. And of course, that EU defense cake, we know it's going to grow because the Europeans have decided to increase dramatically their defense spending. So, German, Polish, Italian, etc., they will spend more on defense. And what Keir Starmer hopes is they will buy more UK-made weapon system, which is not a bad bet. It's quite a reasonable, assumption. It is likely that they will buy more UK manufactured weapon systems and perhaps aircrafts in the future. And so by getting closer to the EU, by sacrificing perhaps a little bit of the interest of UK fisherman, Scottish farmer, Welsh dairy milkman, what the British government is saying is that we're going to have in return for that sacrifice, we're going to have a lot of contracts going forward for companies like British Aerospace, Rolls-Royce, etc., and we're going to sell more.
Yes, well, the fishing boats' access to the UK waters was until 2038 was a major sticking point during the Brexit deal. And as you've mentioned, some are criticising him for backsliding on Brexit. But you do believe, your opinion, that it is a risk worth taken by Keir Starmer?
That's certainly the calculation. When you're in power, you don't have the luxury of finessing too much. And, and honestly, it's, these negotiations have dragged for nearly 9 years. So there's a moment after 8-9 years where you stop finessing and you say, okay, I'm going to cut my finger or I'm going to cut my hand and I'm going to move forward. And I think that what the calculation made by Keir Starmer is that, the fishermen and the oyster farms and the dairy product, whatever, these guys are a finger, let's cut them, let's move forward. And there's another factor, maybe the other elephant in the room, apart from Vladimir Putin and the Russian-Ukrainian war, the other elephant in the room is that 2 weeks ago, there were by-elections. There were a series of important by-elections in the northwest of England, and the results were disastrous for both Labour, the governing party, but also for the Conservative Party, disastrous. And the populist far right got very high scores. They won the only MP, the only parliamentary seat, which was in contest, but they also won a bunch of municipalities and local councils with a huge margin.
And that makes more sense for the timing of these talks between the UK and the EU.
Exactly.
Yes. Exactly. Mr. Maher Nicolas Firzli, the World Bank former advisor and director of the Washington Forum, thank you very much, sir, for your insights. And unfortunately, by this we come to the end of this episode of In Focus. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News. I'm Maher Nicolas Firzli. Thank you for joining us.